Hello, my name is Ruben Slorick, and this is the final evaluation piece on my FMP short film project. So overall, I think the project went well. I think I ended with a final product that I'm happy with. There were a lot of mistakes I made and a lot of lessons I learned, and a lot of things that are up and down across the whole thing. I think, though, despite all those things that maybe didn't go to plan, or maybe weren't as effective or as detailed as they could be, they still all came together to create a final product that I am happy with. I think the research itself was good. I think I was really detailed and it displayed a lot of development from how I was performing my research in previous units. Research was somewhat of a weakness of mine, as I wouldn't know like the best ways of finding resources and finding ways to source information and putting it all together. But I feel like the research I performed in this unit was fairly effective and applied very well to the actual project overall. The planning was it was okay. I think I lacked some detail in some areas, but all the documents I covered were vital and they proved their purpose in the final product itself. And I think also it did also show some development in my ability to plan ahead. However, obviously we have the massive problem with how I planned main production and then how that turned out in the actual production. But obviously we're going to cover that later. The production itself was extremely up and down. It just didn't go to plan at all. I think that is predominantly due to my planning. With that being said, I don't think I said this enough in my the evaluation of my main production. I think a lot of the actual techniques like cinematography and lighting, I think, went very, very well, and I seriously improved a lot in those areas. So I do want to try and focus a bit more positively on the main production side of the evaluation in this video. Um, but I think I did learn more than any other segment of work in the main production, and also it was the biggest and the biggest part of the whole production of the short film. The editing process went very well. It was extremely efficient, and the workflow was consistent, and there was no real problems in that production side at all. It was just using techniques I've used in the past and all that kind of thing. There was not a whole lot of area where I learned and stuff, maybe in the color grading side of things. But overall, I went really well and just kind of pulled all this production work together. So it kind of made this nightmare production schedule all worth it because I was able to pull it all together and make a really effective final product. And I don't think I would have the short film I have now if it weren't for the effective editing I had done. So I think overall the project went well, with its ups and downs and had its roadblocks in the way. But I am happy with the final product. Also in this project, I feel like I did learn a lot. I learned so much about planning, contingency planning, and how well I work as a person, and how certain editing techniques should work, and also planning certain things and researching certain other aspects, and also learning about these genre types, these media types, all that kind of thing. However, obviously more on that later. I am happy with how these segments went, even the main production one, because I feel the lessons I learned were more valuable than anything else. So straight on to research. The strengths, I feel, of the research mainly revolved around the short film analysis, the inspiration analysis, and the experimentation. The short film analysis has been a strong suit of mine for all the units up until now. It always gives me a really in-depth idea of these genre types and these media types. And I think the one I performed in this one was the most detailed, and the one that the biggest piece of work that told me exactly what I need to try and produce or what I need to recreate in my media product. The inspiration analysis was essentially just an extension of my questionnaire. So I pulled answers from the questionnaire and delved more in depth into what my audience wanted. This was not something we have ever really done in the units. We would do maybe like look into what our answers were saying in the questionnaire, but we never really did something to this extent. But I found it to be extremely useful, and it gave me a really good idea of what exactly I need to do to win over my audience in my product. And the experimentation, why the experimentation itself, I don't think I was delivering the best products I could be in presenting what I want to do, especially the lighting. I thought the lighting was really lackluster when doing that side of experimentation. But I think what went so well with it is how much I learned and how much more prepared I felt when heading into main production. I felt like I knew this equipment, I knew these techniques, I knew this editing, and I felt like I had cut down on learning time. So I shortened the learning curve, because I feel if I were to start lighting without ever doing it before in main production, it would have slowed down production even more, because I'd still be learning how to use it, how to light scenes, just how to use it effectively, really. And I'm really glad I was able to use them beforehand to understand exactly what I need to do when I step on set. The weaknesses, I think, mainly reside in the secondary research and the audience profiles. The secondary research, I feel, was still strong and in detail, but I feel like I could have maybe utilized more sources. I think that would have benefited me greatly, especially when finding out what makes a good short film. I only really used two articles, and while I went into them in depth and understanding all they had to say, I don't think I stayed like, I think I clinged to those too much, and I should have found a couple more to look for. I also think some of my media definitions weren't very great either. They were just kind of they were extracted straight from sources, actually, which is unlike any other secondary research across the whole unit. But that was the one circumstance where I did end up just extracting the definition straight from there, which I wasn't terribly happy with. I feel like I should have just done that differently to present my understanding of it better. The audience profiles, I just feel like they didn't work very well, in that it just answered what I already knew from the questionnaire. I never really used the data from the audience profiles a lot, and there's a reason why a lot of my inspiration analysis came from my questionnaire, not my audience profiles. While it did do a good job of reflecting on who my target audience is and who exactly I'm tailoring my short film to, I don't think it did any more than my questionnaire did. And there was nothing very beneficial there, and I think that's mainly due to some of the questions I asked. They just kind of weren't terribly well thought out. I kind of felt a bit rushed in some areas, so I think in future I would just need to change that a bit and change the questions more. So I think for the skills I developed in research, it's very clear that in research overall, and my ability to use different resources became very apparent. So unlike any other unit, I started using like YouTube videos, and I use like articles, and I use wikis, and I use all this kind of thing, all to build this research. I use the BBFC website to find research on age ratings and what kind of age rating my short film would fit into. I think the research itself had a very positive effect over the project, because without that understanding of all these media products, all these genre types, all these different aspects and codes and conventions of these short films, I could not have created the short film I did. And heading into planning, and especially main production and especially post-production, it would have been a nightmare, because I would have no idea what specific direction to go for, and that wouldn't have gone well at all. I think I enjoyed, in research, I think I did find myself enjoying the short film analysis the most, which I find kind of surprising, because in other units it came to a certain point where I was writing so much and going so in detail, it did become a bit of a laborious task. But not in this circumstance. I did really enjoy it. I was just going through the story, just analysing everything, just pointing everything out, and writing them just what didn't feel very boring. And that's probably why I managed to get those tasks done so quickly. And it gave me such good insight into exactly what these genre types are and exactly what these media types are, that it felt so much worth. It felt really worth it. All that time spent into it felt like I was paid back in all that knowledge and understanding, and that's something I couldn't really trade off, really. So I feel like that's the one I enjoyed the most, because I just enjoy watching short films. In the future, I think when it comes to research, I think just not relying on too many sources. While I did use loads of different types of sources, which I've never done before, which I just mentioned earlier, I feel like I could have used more, as like what I mentioned earlier, and just to keep more varied, and then that just expands on that detail I'm always trying to go for, and expands that high quality standard. However, I don't think I had too much of an effect on the research itself because I still managed to gain that proper understanding of these genre and media types. So I think in the end it was okay. So for planning, I think the strength really resides in the idea generation, storyboard, and script. The idea generation is an interesting one because idea generation has always been a problem for me, a fairly big weak point. I'm not sure why, because I do see myself as a fairly creative person, but when it comes to generating a new idea straight from scratch, I do have a tendency for my brain to just go blank, um, which is a shame because sometimes you'll want to produce something and then you just can't think of any sort of really good idea that you have confidence in. This also became apparent when in the pitch and proposal side of the unit I had to submit my ideas roughly 8 times or so to get it accepted because just my advisor just decided that my ideas just weren't up to the standard of the grade I want. And I think without that direction, I couldn't have really got the strong idea I have now. But I am happy with how well I was able to come up with an idea and then write that narrative synopsis in the planning document. And it was so in detail and so well thought out that I had full confidence in this narrative idea. Um, and that's something that I was quite proud of, you know. Because in past units, I just couldn't think of an idea when it came to like the 1 minute short film. It just took me a while to just think of anything. Um, but I am glad that it went so well this time. I had a narrative I was so confident in and so passionate to tell that it all went okay. So the storyboards was fairly standard, just like any other, really, like the music video, like the short film. It was just writing out these documents. It was about 11 pages long, 87 shots planned, and it took roughly 2 days to do. It took a long time. Well, it would have taken a long time if I didn't concentrate the work into 2 days. But it was really helpful. I know from past units how useful this document is because I always tend to when on shooting days, I'll always use that. Go back to it, visualize what's the image is, and then look at the description and then recreate the shot and see if it looks good and then retake it if need be. But I always found it really, really helpful. And I think in this one, I went into a lot of detail in the drawings and the descriptions, everything. I didn't cut any corners really. Aside from the feedback I needed where I forgot some things about the shot numbers and the timescales, which I added after my advisor gave me that piece of feedback. But those helped me so much in main production because that was the main document I was always referring to, that and the script. Those two were just so useful. Moving on to the script, I think it did display that script writing is hard. To make it sound natural, like these are real people talking, these are real characters, it is tricky. It's not easy at all. And that's why I felt like I should do secondary research into script writing. And the main point I ran with from that research was the idea that the effects of your characters around the words is more important than the actual words said in the dialogue. And I tried that a lot with the idea of voicemails and the scene of Rihanna dropping the phone as she hears Josh reveal that there was never an affair and she never had to kill Alice. And I feel knowing that it made the script so much more effective, and then I was able to continuously refer to the script when in main production to just immediately tell the actors their lines. And I think without that, it would have been hell because they had no idea what they're doing, or what they're saying, or what they're acting, or the context of the scene. But I feel like those all really helped bring the main production together and also just finalize my entire planning and idea. And obviously, it did come with its changes. The biggest being the change in actors, because I was planning to use 3 adult actors, but unfortunately that didn't happen. As I mentioned in my planning evaluation, it didn't happen at all, but I managed to get a solid idea and a completed idea, and then I was able to move on to main production. So I think I think the weaknesses of my planning mainly were the site recce and the production schedule. I don't think the production schedule was an 100% weakness, but we'll get onto that later. The site recces, I think, mainly reside in my timing between checking the sites and then filming on them. So we had the whole thing about that me wrecking the site when they had that temporary gate there during development in the site in Blakemere, and then when I got there, when I had it in my storyboards, had it in the shot list, it was gone. Meaning I had to think on the spot and immediately think, oh crap, okay, what can I do? What do I do? What shots do I put in? And then I changed it. So she instead I still wanted to have close-ups of Rihanna's hands moving around the scene and just kind of make it more visually engaging. So I changed it to her hands running along the fence, which looked good. I was happy with how that looked. And I didn't have to sacrifice some of that visual engagement that I had planned in the thing. But thinking on my toes really like put to test my skills as a director. I think the production schedule, the document itself was okay. It was fine. It was filled out in detail. It was all okay. The main the main problem with the production schedule was, of course, my over ambition and how quickly I could film the entire short film. I had planned to film the entire thing on the night of the 17th of May. That did not happen. As I mentioned, it took 4 days. We filmed over 4 days, yeah, didn't happen at all. And I think that was the main weakness with the production schedule. I was too ambitious. I didn't understand my own workflow. I didn't understand, I didn't really take into account how I work as a director, as a creator, all that kind of thing. And I was over ambitious, and I oversold what I could do in that amount of time, and it backfired. Immensely. I am lucky that I managed to get all the shots I needed to completed. I think planning affected the whole project very mixed. I think some documents like the script, the storyboard, the shot list, all that kind of thing, elevated the main production overall, kept the whole thing planned, it kept the whole thing like collected and made sure I knew what I was doing, or my actors knew what they were doing, and all that. So it made sure that the whole thing stayed afloat and everyone knew what was going on, everyone knew what was happening, and so we could move shot after shot after shot knowing what we're doing. We were never running around like headless chickens, like deciding, oh, do we get this shot, do we get that shot, what do we do here, what do we do there? The only circumstance with that was with the Blakemere gate thing, which we mentioned earlier. I think the planning affected the project negatively, obviously, with the over-ambitious planning in filming, which I just mentioned. I think it just really threw off the whole thing, and it caused unnecessary stress for everybody, especially me, and also really made me question whether I'm going to get the whole thing done for the deadline. But we're here now, so I think we're going to make it okay. But yeah, I learned a lot from that massive mistake I made there, because I just didn't do enough contingency planning, and that is my fault, 100%. And there's no other excuse to that apart from all I have to say is that I have to learn from it. I have a lot to learn, and I will in later units. But yeah, I think what I enjoyed most in planning would have to be probably the storyboards. Mainly because now I am now fully visualizing my narrative. Because it's one thing writing the synopsis and the shot list down, but those are just words. When I'm drawing the shots and bringing it all together, I'm really seeing the whole thing how I want it to. And it almost works as like a visualization diagram document, as I'm just kind of seeing all these shots I want to do and seeing them all come together, and really finally seeing how I want this whole thing to work. And it was just a really interesting process, despite how long it took. It was really interesting. I think what I would do differently in the future for planning is obvious, is just more contingency planning. Plan for what will go wrong. In later units, I need to take the stance where I assume that everything's going to go wrong. I need to assume that every single thing in main production will go horrendously wrong, and I need to plan for that. It may not go horrendously wrong at all, and that's okay, but it may go horrendously wrong. And if I make sure that's okay as well, then there's no way we'll have the same issues we did in this project. And that is a big lesson. That is a big, big lesson. I think that's something I can not only apply to later in the media course, but also just in work, in media in general, really. My understanding of, well, if you take the idea that everything could go wrong, then don't let anything go wrong. And that is an important lesson to take. Main production itself, I think the biggest strengths actually reside in the other aspects of filming. So I think the efficient recording of the sound effects was really well done. Like, I was able to get everything done on time and managed to do everything when I needed. I just kind of ran around and recorded everything. I made a comprehensive list of everything I needed, and I had asset links for anything I couldn't get myself. And it was very well recorded. I did it very quickly, and I stayed on track with it all. And when it came to editing, I had everything I needed, and I made sure to name every file, and I made sure to make everything organized in different folders to make sure I know exactly what I'm doing when it comes to those sound effects and all that kind of thing. I think the lighting work, which is where I want to talk more positively about the production, lighting was really, really effective in the main production. I'm really happy with how it looked. I took a different approach to lighting as I did in the experimentation, and I could only have done that if I did the experimentation, so I'm lucky I did that. In the experimentation, I kind of underlit scenes. I kind of got obsessed with the idea that, mise-en-scène, we're trying to do horror, we have to keep the lighting dark and dim, there should be minimal lighting. When it came to main production, I did the opposite. I said, okay, let's make the scenes bright. Turn off all the lights in the house, block up the windows, and then all the light will be artificial and we have full control over the light, and let's make this not be scared to make the scenes bright. And then what I did was, again, we'll talk about this later in post, I darkened them down in post, I color graded, and that meant I had full control over the brightness of the scene, which is lucky with some of the feedback I had on my rough cut. So yeah, I lost the fear of, having to keep that mise-en-scène and having to underlight it and all that kind of thing. I just removed that fear and just lit it a lot. I used 2 lights instead of 1, and I just lit up subjects, lit up backgrounds, lit up as much as possible to make it look as good as possible and give myself the freedom I needed for when recording and for when editing in post. I think the camera work was also surprisingly good in most areas. I think the gimbal was a bit tricky to get the hang of. It's a weird thing. It did tend to disconnect sometimes, or just kind of lose control or whatever. And that's just the way this kind of technology is sometimes. But we did get all the shots we needed, and a lot of the tracking shots and wide shots looked great. Specifically, I love this shot where we see Rihanna up against the fence. It's a stationary mid shot, but then as she starts walking, it tracks her and begins following her with very little motion in the camera. It looks great. And that's an example of how effective the gimbal was. The DSLR camera, I think when I got used to changing the exposure, the shutter speed, the ISO and the aperture, I was really good at beginning to expose my scenes properly and getting them to look the way I wanted. However, that also meant I didn't have access to that gimbal anymore because my gimbal only works with a phone, unfortunately. So yeah, when you're recording with the camera, there were shots that were a bit shaky, and I feel like those were some big issues. And I think a couple audience members did also point that out, that a couple of shots were a couple that come to mind is the opening shot of the Chester Road, as well as one of the tracking shots of Alice walking towards the bedroom door. They're a bit too shaky. And I feel like I should have reviewed them on the day and then refilmed them there. But I didn't. Even though I did reshoot those 2 scenes, I happened to reshoot those scenes multiple times actually. So those were the best takes. But I feel like those were still just really rocky and quite shaky. So still a lot to work on there. But the cinematography I also thought was very impressive for my skill grade. I was very happy with some certain shots. You know, some of the shots with the cigarette and lighter, I thought those looked great. The one of downstairs with the silhouette looking up, or some of the shots of Rihanna as she walks towards Alice, those tracking shots, they just look fantastic. And I'm really proud of them. I think they really show development in my ability to be a cinematographer, because as mentioned in previous units, cinematography is also a weak point of mine. I feel like photography I'm okay at, you know, I get away with it. Cinematography less so. I was never great at it. I could never really figure out how to make a shot look the best it could, and that changed for this one. I felt much more confident in my ability to shoot a scene well, make a scene look good, fill a frame properly. So yeah, I was quite happy with that. I also thought the strength was my actor direction. This leans more into the idea of how I used continuity and action editing, all that kind of thing. Differently to my other unit projects like the short film and the music video, I used people who have acting experience. Aside from Josh, Rihanna and Alice both have done theatre, all that kind of thing. So they understood what they were doing when it came to moving in a scene, not just acting in a scene. They moved like a person. They just kind of operated how you would moving around a set, and it looked so much better and allowed me to use different camera angles and switching to create that match and action look, which looks fantastic in the final cut. And I think also it did rely on a lot of my ability to explain to them what I wanted, the context of the scene, everything like that. I think in the start of production, I wasn't great at this. I was being a bit vague and being a bit kind of just, oh, do this, but not applying lots of detail. Towards the end, I was much more focused on what exactly I needed, the detail I needed. I just tell them, okay, so we need to do this. This is the reason. This is how it's going to look. This is where the camera's going to be, all that kind of thing. And I just told them everything about the shot to try and like explain to them everything, and they do it. So in a lot of cases, first take, it looked great, which is very different from the start where we had to do multiple takes for a lot of shots. But yeah, I'm really happy with a lot of these strengths, and it's interesting to take such a more positive approach to the main production, which was possibly the weakest of the whole unit. I think weaknesses for the main production, the biggest one, the elephant in the room, is obviously how long filming took. It took far too long, and it was just a nightmare. It took 4 days. We were supposed to do 1 day, it took 4 days, and it was just awful. But luckily we got everything done, and I don't think there's much more to talk about really. I've basically covered it head to toe really, and like everything I need to talk about when it comes to the massive mistakes I made there and the lessons I learned. I think my other weakness to talk about with main production, which is an interesting one, which also lies into the idea of what went wrong in how long it took to film, is the use of nighttime. The problem with nighttime I found with filming here is that it is extremely restricting in the hours you can shoot. So of course we had to shoot when the house was dim and everything, and you will also notice in the short film that when you look outside the window it is still fairly bright or cloudy and everything. That is just because it is June, meaning it stays bright until about 10-11 o'clock at night when actors just aren't available, really. They need to get home, all that kind of thing. So when you're that limited to only be able to shoot past like 6-7 o'clock at all, because that's only when the house is dim enough to create that mise-en-scène, it is brutal, to be honest. It makes shooting times awful. It makes it really tricky to create a schedule that works with everybody, and that was one of the biggest problems, and the biggest like cause of actually like having this extremely delayed shoot time. So in future, I do not want to try and shoot exclusively at night ever again. It was a nightmare, really, and I think that was a catalyst to the whole problem that it was in the main production. I think also another weakness, I had a couple less favourable shots all throughout. Again, this links back to some of the shots being shaky, and other shots just not being framed very well. I was never really a fan of the overhead shot of Rihanna looking upon Alice's body as she lowers the gun. Originally, that was cut in the rough cut. However, my advisor requested that I bring it back. He thought that it would be necessary to displaying the effect of the body there. So I did, but I never liked it. I thought the frame looked cluttered. And it looked like it had no real sense of direction. It didn't look good in my opinion, but in the short film now, I am okay with it being there. I think it does look, it has its purpose, but I just never really liked it at all. I think that these skills I developed in main production reside in all the things I've mentioned. So I think the way I've recorded sound effects all the way throughout, and my ability to light a scene and keep a scene look good in its mise en scène, in the way I wanted to look in that genre type, and also my cinematography. I think that's developed so much, and I can feel like I can take much more effective looking videos now that I have more understanding of my DSLR camera and how to expose scenes properly and how to use different settings for different circumstances. I feel much more confident in how I will film anything going forward, and also I feel like I have more understanding in framing certain shots and how I want subjects to be placed in the frame, and relying on the rule of thirds and lighting and shadows and all that kind of thing. I also think my skills as a director were developed so much. My skills in direction were never great in previous units. I feel like I was always vague in the message and the acting I wanted. I never really gave like a full idea of what I wanted, but I think this project has also shown me how effective I can be as a director and how effective good directing is for the overall quality of your short film, and it's just necessary. I think what I enjoyed most in main production would be, despite how hellish it was just running around with the camera and just filming all these shots and stuff. I did really enjoy just filming in the house. I did like the ending scenes with Rihanna where she was looking at the papers and stuff. I did find that really enjoyable. I thought that was really good to film. It was a really enjoyable experience, that one. That's a big standout for me. But despite everything that went wrong, I did enjoy filming it, which I suppose is a good sign for later units. I think if I were to do main production again in the future, I think I'd want to more take a step back in how I'm filming everything. And I want to evaluate, okay, what have I said to my actors? How have I set up the camera? How have I set up the lighting? Take a step back and say, okay, does everyone know everything? Is everything set up? Are we ready to shoot? And not just kind of or blindly say to my actors, give them a good detailed description of what I want, and then just hit shoot. Do I need to rehearse it with them? Will I need to relight certain scenes for what they're going to do? Will I need to move the camera for what they're going to do? And not just settle for what I've told them, and maybe adapt to what they want to do as well as an actor. I think just understanding what I've told my actors and taking a step back and seeing, okay, what have I said to these people? Like, is it going to be effective before I hit shoot, before I hit film? I think the editing, the strengths and weaknesses was essentially just the entire process. It was really efficient. It just worked incredibly well. It was really streamlined. I would edit the narrative as it went, as the shots I had. I started editing the day after the first shooting day, so I only had half the footage, but I just began putting it together. And while I had blank spaces and this massive gap in the whole footage, I just started telling the narrative through this footage, and that did make editing easier and faster and everything like that. And then as I slowly got more and more footage, I just pieced together the narrative in chronological order, and that's how I edited it. And then I would, color grade it, add sound, all that kind of thing. And then subsequently, in the sound design, I removed all sound from the actual footage, and then every single sound you hear in the short film is actually recorded in post and edited in post, which looks so much better. It looks amazing. But I thought the entire process overall was extremely effective and streamlined, and I managed to get everything done in a confident amount of time. And I was able to deliver a rough cut to my advisor in really good time for me to get that feedback, create the final cut, and complete the project, really. I think a lot of this is due to my experience in editing, and I kind of know what I'm doing when it comes to this stuff, and there's no kind of gray areas in like knowing what I'm supposed to do and all that kind of thing. So that is kind of the reason for all this, but I am really happy with how that went. I think a weakness would be just relying on some of the feedback I got. I had a lot of feedback in brightening up the color grading, which I mentioned earlier, which I was able to do due to my less fearful use of lighting. So I brightened up a lot of the scenes, and there was some gaps in the sound effects. So I, re-recorded some ambience and changed some of the sounds like the gun click, and added some tension risers, and that looked so much more effective and so much more engaging. Um, and also, I just needed to change the length of the credits. Those were long enough to match the song, and I also had some credits to add in. So I think just some gaps in the editing were the main issues, but there wasn't a whole lot to change, which was very fortunate. Um, but it does also show that the editing was very effective, and there were no real issues in anything like that. But I think the editing overall went really well. I think a lot of the skills I developed in editing is understanding how to tell a story and how to build this kind of atmosphere narrative with these shots you've got, these hundreds and hundreds of shots you've got, how to piece them together and build a story and color grade them into a certain genre type and atmosphere and narrative was really interesting, and something I've never really quite done before. It was really interesting work. I think what I enjoyed in the editing is also the same as that, with the idea of the just building this narrative slowly, pulling all these shots together, color grading, all that kind of thing. And I think also I enjoyed the sound design a lot. Editing the sound design was really interesting because I was conveying this entire genre, especially in the horror side of things. I was especially conveying this horror idea through the sound, like creaking doors and the footsteps and the static from the TV. It was really interesting work, and I found it really entertaining to just kind of watch it all piece together and tell this narrative and convey this genre. And it was really interesting to see. Um, I think what I would do differently for the future editing, I think I would just pay closer attention to my color grading. Um, I think I think color grading and sound effects. I think sound effects was something I'm really new to. So I think I kind of have an excuse there for why it was less effective. But I think I should just pay closer attention to my color grading and making sure it's all consistent. I had some problems with some of the colors being a bit inconsistent in certain shots, like some being greener, some being pinker, some being bluer, some being oranger. Some were they're just slight differences, and I think just paying close attention to that and making sure I don't need to get that feedback to fix it would just be really beneficial, because the only reason I was able to fix those things is because they were pointed out by my advisor. My thoughts on the different versions of the film. I feel like the final cut is better. I do. Um, Originally, when I received the feedback on my rough cut, Mark told me that, yeah, you need to increase the biggest thing. The two big things that he said that stuck out to me were that I need to increase the brightness of the color grading and add in the shot of Alice's body. Originally, I didn't really see the vision in that. I thought it was like right and how dark it was, and I also didn't like. I liked the tension build by not having the shot of Alice's body. However, after adding both those two things in, I do see how the short film is more digestible from a viewing standpoint with the color grading. It is easier to see everything going on. There's no chance of confusion in understanding what is happening in the frame, where the character is, what emotion is on the character's face, all that kind of thing. And I think it just does enhance it in context and understanding of what is going on. I think also the shot of Alice, I placed it differently to where I planned to put it in my planning, and it looked way more effective in that new place. And I did also see where Mark was coming from there, because I feel like, again, with that idea of confusion and the audience not fully understanding what's going on, you can need to have that in there, because an audience member could watch the gun go off, all that kind of thing, and watch be blood wiped off her face, but still need that full verification that, yes, this character has been killed, this is the climax of the film, someone is dead. I do see that now, to be fair. So those are my opinions on the two versions. I think just overall the rough cut is weaker, which is what you'd expect. Even with such minor changes, it is significantly weaker, which I saw as surprising. I think in conclusion, overall, I am really happy with the final product. I think it's really effective, and the way it conveys the conventions I planned and did research into, I'm really proud of the way it does that. I think it is really effective, and I am happy with what I've got. It really is. It does a good job in presenting the original vision I had when in the planning stages. I think it also has helped me improve so many skills in media, and I think it's taught me so many lessons that I just simply couldn't have got anywhere else with such a larger scale project like this, I think there's no better way I could have learned what I did and developed what I did. Um, I mean, if I were to list some things, I think, it expanded my understanding of short films to begin with. I think I have a much more in-depth understanding of how short films work, how these production teams put them together, and the real process of creating these big short films you see on social media and film festivals, all that kind of thing. Um, I think I also feel a lot more confident in my cinematography. I mentioned this earlier. I just feel so much more confident in my ability to build a frame and shoot it and light it and all that kind of thing. I think the biggest thing I take away from this entire process is how important contingency planning is. It taught me so much about how much can go wrong in production despite all your planning, and how important contingency planning is, and understanding how you work as a person, understanding sitting down and look at yourself and be like, okay, well, this is how I work. This is the kind of workflow I commonly take on, and all that kind of thing. This is how long things usually take me. So let's plan around that. Let's add contingencies to the dates. Let's create original dates that work best for me and all that kind of thing. And I don't think I did that when being brutally honest to myself. I should have been more honest to myself and understood myself better, to then create those contingency dates, create those dates that work better for how I work, and then there would be no chance of proper delays, and I can plan around all this to make it work better. I think also the project overall also showed me how effective completely imposed sound effects are. I am no experienced Foley artist, but it did teach me a lot about that process and the editing process of sound effects in general, and it showed that it is brilliant for conveying atmosphere and conveying that creepy ambience that horror is so known for. So I think understanding how efficient sound effects are now is a really beneficial thing and will prove to be useful later on in the course. I think also a massive thing that I take away from this whole project is that I'm now able to tell a story through film. I feel like the narrative I planned, looking back on it, compared to other short films, was fairly complex. It had a lot of context needed to it, and multiple characters, and there was multiple twists, all kind of twists and turns, and all that. But I was still able to tell it effectively. My advisor had no problem with the way it was told, and I had quite a few positive comments from audience members about the narrative. I did have some less positive ones. They understood what was going on towards the end, but there were some areas of confusion, which obviously, this is my first time doing such a complex story, so there's a lot to work on there still for later projects. I think also I did also just improve my skills as a director as well. That was a great opportunity to just kind of sit down with more actors and just understand exactly how to express my vision to them and all that kind of thing. I think also the chance to learn and use lighting as well will be really, really helpful for later units. I found myself just zipping around with the light towards the end and just lighting on the scenes, and as I said, not having that scare to light scenes the way they should be and then add them in post. It just worked great, and I feel much more confident in that skill. I think also this whole project showed me how difficult writing is. I mentioned earlier as well the fact that writing characters is hard and making them sound natural is really difficult. It's not easy to make a viewer watch a character talk and be like, that sounds a bit off, that sounds weird, all that kind of thing. And I think the biggest aspect where my writing and all that was less effective was the voicemail left by Josh, which was obviously voice recorded by Louis Hunt, and the writing in that, which my advisor told me, sounded more like a voicemail, which is why we had to reshoot the shot of the phone pulling up to make it say voicemail, not incoming call, because it would just sound more natural that way and it would come off as less jarring. But overall, I think the final product was a success. It's an effective short film that tells a story and it conveys a genre, two genres as to be precise. But I think it is effective in what it's doing, and it works well as a narrative, as a short film, and as a horror piece, and as a thriller piece. And I'm really happy with how it finally came out. It did come out well and effectively, and I'm happy with how it looks in the final product. I think its authenticity to specifically the horror genre is also really apparent, and I'm very happy with that. My planning was clearly put to use. My planning and research specifically were really well put to use to really convey those genres and create a really effective short film. And I think without that understanding of the media type and research, and without that extensive planning in like sorting out every shot, every sound effect, everything like that, it could not have been done effectively. And with all that put together, I was able to deliver a really effective short film that I am proud of, I am happy with. So that's all, really. That's the final evaluation of my short film. Everything about it, what went well, what went badly, and how I feel about it, what I learned. So yeah, that's the final evaluation for my FMP short film Green Eyes. So yeah, thank you.